Sometimes in tabletop games, and the world, especially in its current state, you can't get a group together to play. So you turn to the solo game. With a huge selection to choose from, there are tons of different ways to play. This week on Schedule for Launch, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk to Jordan, or Hypnos, about their game and the Gunslinger Followed. In this solo journaling tabletop role-playing game, hunt down your enemy as they flee across the desert in this Dark Tower-inspired world. We talk about solo games, starting out, and Jasper's Game Day. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover the projects that you may have missed. This week, I'm here with Jordan, or Hypnos, and their game, and the Gunslinger Follows. Jordan, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Yeah, honestly, happy to be here. I think you're the first person to message me and invite me to something rather than me asking to be on something.
You know what, though? I really like the Dark Tower, and this game definitely has some influences from there. And I'd never looked at a solo game before. So I'm really excited to talk about this and learn a little bit about that. I told you before we started, actually, I picked it up because I was so interested. So I'm excited to hear more about this game.
Yeah.
Before we get started, though, Jordan, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm Jordan, or Hypnos, as I'm known pretty much exclusively on the internet, which started purely because I like Hades.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my profile picture on Twitter is art of Hypnos from the Hades video game.
Oh, I thought I recognized it. I just couldn't place it.
Yeah, I make short indie games on itch.io, and that's about it.
Well, that's still good to hear. I'm a little bit embarrassed. I didn't pick that up. I love that game. So, we're here to talk about And the Gunslinger Followed. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, sure. And the Gunslinger Followed is a Dark Tower inspired supernatural western solo role playing game. It's a journaling game inspired mostly by the very first book, The Gunslinger, also where the title of the book of the game comes from. And it's basically just prompts of random events that happen as your western archetype chases the cowboy across the desert.
That's what I find interesting, because I personally didn't really know what a journaling game was prior to this. I've played 2 rounds, actually. So once we finish this up, I actually think I'm going to finish it up because I was really enjoying that. So could you explain a little bit about how a journaling game works, or a solo game in this format works?
Yeah, sure. So this specific format was honestly the only one I knew of when I started making this solo game, and basically it's just you get a random prompt, or you get some kind of like event that happens to your character, and you write from the point of view of that character and how they act. Sometimes there's a dice system, sometimes it's just based entirely on how you feel about the fiction. This game does have a dice system. That is, I got it from a Twitter thread that was where it was heavily blackjack inspired.
Okay.
And yeah, you're just writing from the point of view of your character, and how they react, and what you think the consequences are, that kind of thing. And it's just 5 separate prompts, and then the final showdown with the cowboy.
Yeah, it's really straightforward, and it only takes about an hour to run through a game.
Yeah. Yeah, I played I play tested it while at work using dice bots on my phone, and live tweeted all of my journaling, and that took about 45 minutes to play through it once.
Oh, wow. So, for people who are interested, could you kind of explain a little bit about how the dice system does work in this game?
Sure. So it's a degree of success system where a 1 is an outright failure, and then it's a 2 through a 4, I think, is success with a complication, and then a 5 and a 6 is a straight out success. When you roll a die, you can choose to roll a second six-sided die and add the two results together. Anything above a 6 is considered just a straight up failure. So you want to land in that 5 to 6 area, but if you go over, it goes back to just a straight up failure. So there's kind of a push your luck thing with the you can land in that success with a complication area and decide whether or not do I want to stick with this and get a good and a bad thing, or do I want to see if I can push it just a little bit farther and get just a full success.
Okay, so that's where that blackjack inspiration comes from, that
Yeah.
taking another and trying to stay under the target.
Mhm.
That's really cool. Obviously, this game is inspired by the Dark Tower series.
Mhm.
You even mentioned that the name, specifically the first book, it's a direct reference to one of the very first lines in the story, actually. What other inspirations kind of help build out this game?
Well, I'm also just a big fan of traditional westerns alongside the supernatural westerns of the Dark Tower. Um, and I'm sure the place that you can see that best is in the character archetypes, the different
Yes.
playable characters. The Gunslinger and the Kid are very Dark Tower.
Yeah.
But the other four, or three others, not the witch, but three of the others are very Western because we've got the Badge, the
Mhm.
Doctor, and the Preacher, um, who are all just very standard Western archetypes.
Western. Yeah. And then there's the witch, which is an original for you, right?
Yeah, it. I wanted to lean a little bit more into the supernatural aspect because there were some hints at magic in the events, and it some of the prompts basically just state that the cowboy knows magic, but it never really
Okay.
elaborates on that much. And so I
Ah,
decided
okay.
a magic using archetype could be kind of interesting.
Yeah. I think that makes total sense. We've been talking a little bit about those. Could you actually explain the archetypes and how that affects your journaling and how it affects play?
Sure. So the archetypes are mostly a role play thing. They're mostly just to affect the point of view that you're taking, how you think a character in that archetype would act in certain situations. But
Mm.
they give two bonuses. They give a static +1 to any roll where you're doing this thing. Like the gunslinger gets a +1 bonus when he is fighting with a gun. That makes sense. But
Yeah.
they also get one ability that lets them just to decide something in the fiction. Um, because the inspired by the Dark Tower, the gunslinger comes from a gunslinger order. He's the
Yeah.
last or one of the last of this order, and throughout the books, you see him bring out techniques and things sort of close to magic that you never would have expected him to do. I believe at one point
Mhm.
in the books, he hypnotizes somebody with a cartridge.
Yes, I totally forgot about that.
And I wanted to do something like that, so I gave the gunslinger an ability of just like only once in this playthrough you get the chance to just decide something that you learned from your gunslinger order and do it. And
Mm,
there's no role associated; it just happens.
okay. The big thing to remember in the solo games is that you're really playing against yourself. So
Yeah.
it's limiting your character based on what they would do then.
Hmm. Yeah, the whole point of a solo game, especially a journaling game, is kind of just tell a story. Even more so than big collaborative games. It's that you're in full control of the rules. If you decide that something in the rules doesn't fit or you don't like it, you just don't have to do it.
That's a really interesting mentality when you're playing the solo game because I think back to when I was younger, and maybe if I was playing something, I would just be like, well, that doesn't happen.
Hmm.
And this kind of style of game kind of allows for that
Yeah,
based on the narrative you're telling, then, right?
yeah. Um, it's supposed to just this game specifically, at least, supposed to just tell one overarching story, events that happen while you travel from point A to point B. That's so. If something comes up and you decide I don't like that, or I don't want my game to include that, anything like that, you can just say, no, that doesn't happen.
That's very cool. I like that a lot. Like I said, this is a whole new world of games for me.
Hmm.
One of the things you had mentioned there, though, that I wanted to touch on was playtesting. So, did
Hmm.
you do all the playtesting yourself, or did you have a couple other people check it out first?
I did all of the playtesting myself. I only playtested it a couple times, only the couple of the characters. I still personally haven't even played all of the archetypes. I only played the Gunslinger, and I think the Doctor was the other one I played.
Okay. Compared to other games, then, how does playtesting work for a journaling game? Because the rules seem a little bit looser in this style of tabletop role playing game.
The point of playtesting, at least for me with this game, was kind of just what do these events make sense in the fiction,
Okay.
and do they have narratively interesting outcomes, or are they just fun? Like, if it's narratively interesting or it's fun, that's really all you want from a solo game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of all playtesting was. I would play through something and I'd be like, well, that event kind of just happened and then went away and nothing changed, and it was kind of just a character walked up and talked to me. And I that was really boring. So I'd delete that and I'd rewrite it. I'd replace it with something else.
All right. For the audience, then, could you explain kind of how you generate these different scenes? Because you can play this game a lot with very different stories as run throughs of it. And that's one of the things I really like about it is the replayability of it. So, how does getting different events work in this game?
There's a random table with 2d6. You roll on it. You use the value of the dice separately to determine what event
Okay.
you pick off of the table. Um, and I tried to make some of the events not character specific, but more tied into what the characters are good at. There's a couple events that say if X character is here, like you don't roll dice, instead Y event happens.
Okay.
Um, to try and like give a little more reason for the different character archetypes, because there's a
All
fine
right.
line in such a narrative game between um, actually unique characters that have different effects on the world versus just you making things up.
Yeah. Okay. So, this was one of the coolest things about and the Gunslinger followed that I wanted to talk about because it is an optional rule that kind of puts a bit of a tailspin on this and makes it not exactly a soloing game, but something you could play with a small group. Can you talk about the options for group play?
Yeah, that that actually came about. My partner helped me write this game a good amount. And originally the game was going to be solely a solo game. It was going to be the gunslinger chasing the cowboy. There weren't originally character archetypes. There were just going to be a bunch of
Hmm.
random events. And
Okay.
while my partner and I were sitting there just bouncing ideas back and forth, we had the thought of like, what if you do? Because we had the idea of playing it together, and we were like, well, what if we do want to? We have to include more characters, and my first idea was like, all right, one player is always the gunslinger and his allies. And
Okay.
my partner did not like that, and actually very pushed me to change it to you can freely pick between them. And I think that actually ended up making it a better game, personally, because
Yeah.
I feel like every game having the Gunslinger in it would have gotten boring after a little while.
Yeah.
But yeah, the cooperative is essentially changes it from a solo RPG to a GM-less RPG, where when one person decides on an event, the player to their left takes on a pseudo GM role for that one event.
Okay. So they describe the outcome, or they narrate it. How does it work?
They would describe the outcome, um, because I feel like with journaling you get a lot more time to kind of revise and make sure a thing fits the narrative you're trying to build. And if you're just speaking to a group, it's without somebody arbitrating, it can sometimes be like you feel like you're just playing pretend around the table. Like it things don't always make sense because you haven't had the time to go over it any at all. So I
Yeah.
think giving passing off the arbitration of the outcomes gives a lot more like plausibility to the world. I don't know what the word would be, but
Okay.
like taking it, one person decides, "Oh, I'm gonna do this thing," and they roll the dice, um, and one person decides how to interpret the dice.
Okay. It makes it a lot more material.
It does.
Okay, that's really cool. So, at its core, this game is really straightforward. It consists of 5 rounds before a finale, and that finale event's determined based on the outcome of the 5 rounds. And during those 5 rounds, you can gain conditions. Before we get into a talk about how finales work in this game, can you talk a little bit about what conditions are and how they work for each character?
Yeah, sure. Conditions work more or less the same for every character. I just wanted something other than, oh, you hit 0 hit points, you died. Your game is
Mm,
over. Because I felt like, especially in a solo RPG, that's very narratively unsatisfying because game just kind of ends there. If somebody dies in a
there are
group,
better ways to fail.
a
Yeah.
narrative can spin out of that. But if the one
Yeah.
player at the table dies, it's so conditions are basically just penalties you accrue as you go on this quest for vengeance or whatever your character's motivation is. Each archetype has their own motivation. But like you're pushing yourself through all of these bad situations and you're just building up penalties as you struggle to get to the cowboy in the end, and each condition will actually have give you a penalty on your final roll in the end.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So those conditions make that last event a little bit trickier or
Hmm.
harder, and sometimes they might even affect the clock if I'm correct, right?
Yes, there is the clock, which is just uh I felt that you can only take with a D6 system, you can only take a few conditions before it's like, well, you just can't win now.
Yeah.
Like there's 5 events. If you get a condition in each one, your first
Yeah,
roll
that's
is
it.
guaranteed to be a 1 or a negative number even. And that's
Hmm.
just not fun. So I wanted a balance between you take a condition to avoid the cowboy from escaping, or you can add to the clock and kind of push that like he's a little bit getting a little bit farther out of your reach and you're kind of pushing it a little bit because one wrong thing happening can make him escape.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's a total different spin on how the game really works in that part, and it helps create the narrative of. I said narrative really weird there. It it helps create the narrative that this cowboy could get away from you at any point.
Hmm. And I'm gonna let you in on like a little secret here is that how the clock is constructed. It's pretty difficult for the it's extremely difficult for the cowboy to get away.
Yeah.
It's kind of just there as a threat of like it puts narrative pressure on you without actually putting like mechanical pressure on you, and
Hmm.
also gets you to take a couple conditions.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. It's if you go into this game where you're running across the desert, and even if you, as the narrator and journaling and the player of this game, go through this huge, treacherous journey and you come out without a scratch, it it's not nearly as narrative satisfying as the doctor who pulled themselves across the desert to find this person.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So one of the things that you told me about before we actually started recording was the solo but not alone bundle. And you said that was a huge inspiration on why you went out and made this game. What's solo but not alone? I've personally never heard of it.
Solo but not alone is a bundle. This is the second year that it is happening. It's run by Kat. You might know her as Catling Gun. She runs Peach Garden
Oh,
Games.
okay. Yeah.
Um, and she did this last year, and she's doing it again, where people who've made solo games can submit their games to this bundle, and all the proceeds go to Jasper's Game Day, which is a charity for suicide prevention.
Oh, that's great.
Um, Last year, I think there were 74 games in the bundle, and it was
Wow.
$10. And they raised $31,000.
Wow.
Um, and this year we ended up with 101 games in the bundle, again for $10.
Yeah.
I think we've hit like 40% of our goal already, and there's still like a month left in the bundle. Um, but the reason it really pushed me to create this game is because my partner and I had written about 2 pages of it. We had written the
Okay.
narrative ideas of the archetypes down, and we had
Yeah.
written down the basic setting, and then
Okay.
it sat in my Google Drive for about a month and a half,
Mm.
just untouched. And I saw I'm in kind of the same circle as Kat, so I, you know, end up talking to her a lot, and I saw her mention the solo but not alone bundle. I was like, that sounds like a great thing to contribute to. I have a month to make a solo game now.
I didn't know that. That's incredible. I'll definitely have to spread the word about this one really heavy because the roots of where this came from is just so much. I people here on the show might be aware, but I work as a youth coordinator and
Hmm.
I work with kids. So that kind of topic is it's a really not sensitive, that's not the right, but important.
Yeah.
That's and as it should be for anybody. Like Jasper's Game Day, I think is an incredible organization and event. I'm not even sure what
Hmm.
I would consider it, but I think it's incredibly important for people to in the tabletop role playing game space to know about.
Hmm.
So knowing that you did that to contribute to this like that, it's it's really sweet, which is hilarious, especially if you know about we talked a little bit about the Dark Tower series and some of the events that
It's just
happened in it.
depressing.
Yeah, it's an amazing series, but a real bad time for the characters.
Yeah. Um,
Go read the Dark Tower; it's very good.
I agree. Yeah, so this was actually the first game I did the layout on also. I did all of that. I was actually on vacation at the time I did most of the work on this because I was
Okay.
working at the time. Um, we're in the process of moving, so I'm like not quite full time right now while we're trying to figure that out.
Mm,
But
yeah,
at the time I was working full time, um,
yeah.
and so always very tired and didn't get much work done. And I went on vacation and immediately just started writing a lot, and was just like, oh, I can like finish the writing on vacation. I had the project submitted like 4 days into vacation to the bundle already
Oh wow.
because I just sat down and I was just like, I just had time in the day again, so I'd sit down and I'd write for a little bit and be like, wow, I've been here for 4 hours.
It's kind of like me in editing. I'll sit down and be like, oh, I'll just do 10 minutes of editing, and then I'm absorbed into it. I love
Hmm.
finding out about these like people's passions when they come down to it. So it sounds like, to me at least, that you have a real soft spot for writing, and you did mention being a bit of a having a hobby of writing small indie games. What other experiences, like what are some of your other games, and like what are some of the experiences you learned that brought you to writing this one?
Um, I am a person who gets uh, burnt out on a project if I sit too long on it, if I work on just the one project. So I have this Google Drive folder filled with like 10, 12 things, all in various stages of completion that I kind of just cycle through over and over again. And I work a few days on each one. Um, and it's kind of just you poke at it until you get a really good idea, and then you write for a week, and then it's done. Um, that's what happened with And the Gunslinger Followed. I poked at it for a little bit, and then I was like, Jasper's Game Day is really cool. I sat down to write it one day, and then all of a sudden it's just like done in front of me. Um, yeah, so honestly, right now I don't have a lot of projects out, but I have a lot in
Yeah.
various stages of completion that have. I learn things as I write it down, and I come to look at it like a month later, and I'm like, wow, I hate all of this. Um,
I'm sorry. It
no,
got
it's
me.
okay.
But you grew as an author when you wrote this and as a designer. So you were able to revise those projects as you went along.
hmm Yeah, there's a few that I've actually I had already been advertising on Twitter, and then I did the whole cycle thing, and I came back to it, and I'm like, this project doesn't work. The mechanics just don't work well together, and so there are things that I have advertised heavily on Twitter that
Yeah.
are in a stage of like complete rewrite.
Uh, you know what though? That's one of my favorite things about early game projects is when it starts off as one idea and then it just totally tailspins into something else.
hmm
Jordan, you had mentioned that you had actually played a couple of other solo games before you ended up writing and the Gunslinger followed. Who would you
hmm
think is the best audience for games like that?
Um, I think there's such a wide like they're so varied in the different solo games that exist that I think journaling games, which is what And the Gunslinger Followed is, work best with
Mhm.
people who want to be writers, basically. Games where you just
Okay.
fully get into the head of one character and you just think through like, all right, this event happened to them and it had this outcome. How would they view it, and how would you analyze like everything about a character and just decide like, oh, how would they view it, and how would they write about it, and how do they write? Um,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of other solo games. I think a very popular one is Ironsworn, which goes the
Yes.
complete opposite direction. That game is like 100 pages long, and it's a
Oh my.
solo, complex dungeon crawler. And I read through that, and I was like, this is a game that I never want to play. Not because it's bad, but because if
There's
I'm
so
memorizing
much.
that many rules, it needs to be for arbitrating a game system between multiple people. Like,
Hmm.
if I'm playing by
Yeah.
myself, I'm doing a narrative thing.
Yeah. Something else that I think is really cool about this is specifically that you're not narrating and journaling as, at least it's not set up to be designed as a third person. There's a huge prompt to be journaling as the character, and that's where the role
hmm
play comes from. And I think that's super interesting because you do get into the head of that character that way.
Yeah, I got that idea from it's called Thousand Year Old Vampire, and it's another very popular solo journaling game. That I have not actually even played. I just read through it and was like, I love this idea of just prompts and writing from the point of view of that character.
Okay. So it's like a very similar design to Thousand Year Old Vampire then,
Yeah. Um,
from that standpoint at least.
Yeah, pretty much. There aren't like playable characters or anything in Thousand Year Old Vampire.
Yeah.
I would say it's possibly less mechanical even than And the Gunslinger Followed. It is purely a narrative experience.
Okay. And that's really where journaling games come down. I also thought that the best people for this style of game after reading this was somebody who wants to write a short story, more or less. So maybe not doing writing down all the events in that, but this is definitely a really cool way to get a character idea down on paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a lot of solo games that are, less focused towards that, but I really like. I struggle how to describe it. I think Matthew Colville said it best. He talks about when he plays a character, he doesn't care about being like dramatic or anything. He wants his characters to feel real.
Yes.
When he speaks, it's not the most dramatic, and it might not even be things you remember, but his characters feel like real people.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm definitely in the same boat. I That's how I prefer to play my characters as well. Jordan, we've been going for a little bit now,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been I've learned a lot about this game, and I've learned a lot about soloing games because, once again, totally new for me, and I plan on playing this more once we finish up and I wait for this episode to render out. So, some questions that I ask at the end of each episode gonna pop up right now because I think they're important, and a lot of people seem to like hearing them. What advice can you give to someone wanting to make their own game, but they don't really know where to start? They don't have a whole lot of experience in designing. What are some things that you think are important for people to take root in and get themselves started on a project?
Honestly, I would say where a lot of my projects start with that kind of thing is just you look at a thing you think is cool and you're like, that's cool and all, but what would my take on it be? I've seen mechanics or I've seen settings that I've really loved, but I don't love other parts of it. And rather than
Hmm.
like bash things for that, you're like, well, if I were to build something around that mechanic, how would I build it?
Yeah.
I've got a few projects in the work right now that are just like I read through other people's games and were like, I really love how narrative this is, but I think it might be uh, not mechanical enough. How would I make this kind of game more mechanical? With And the Gunslinger Followed, it was I read through Thousand Year Old Vampire and I was like, I do like the prompt system and writing back in character, um, but like I just basically attached that basic idea to a setting that I liked a lot more, that I felt a lot more attached to.
Yeah. That's really solid advice. And we recently talked about SRDs and hacks on another
Hmm.
episode, so it's even starting off there would probably work really well with your advice too.
I think that SRDs are a great place to start because, like, my very first project that I can remember was built out of the Lumen SRD, and it sits unfinished still, but like, it was a great thing to read through, and like, you basically just read through somebody else's work, and you just think about like, well, what kind of game do these mechanics work for? What kind of setting? What
Yeah.
mechanics would I add? What would I get rid of?
Yeah. People on the show who have listened to a lot of episodes know that I am a huge fan of the Lumen SRD. Schedule for Launch started as a place for me getting really, really frustrated that I
Hmm.
couldn't make a game. And then it went to me playing other games
Hmm.
and liking indie games, and then asking why not more people are playing these smaller titles.
Hmm.
And the Lumen SRD is one specifically that I've worked with when I've gone back to writing, and I really like it. It's like 25 pages long. It's super
Yeah,
short, but it's like
I've
really
got the
solid.
physical copy on my desk right now.
One day, Spencer Campbell, I'll get you on the show.
It's the only physical SRD I own, and it's one of the few physical RPGs in general that I own.
Wow. Yeah, I like it a lot, and There's so many great ones. So SRDs are phenomenal if you're just starting out. Jordan, where can people find more about you and the Gunslinger Followed?
The best place would probably be on Twitter. My at on Twitter is very weird. It's Mechanico McLeod, but McLeod is spelled like a Scottish last name. It's a weird, complicated spelling that I made when I was not trying to build up a bunch of followers, and so people
That's
didn't
totally
need to
fair.
search for it. You can also find me on itch.io under the name Hypnos. That's about it.
As always, audience, those links are going to be down in the description below. Go check out And the Gunslinger Followed. It's really fun. I've been loving it, especially if you like writing. Even if you're not a huge fan of tabletop role playing games, this is phenomenal for writers and anybody who wants to improve their character study. Because I think that this game works best for me personally as a character study of an archetype. And just, it's very good. It's very fun. It's super simple and easy to learn. So go check it out. Jordan, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast this week. I had a great time. And like I said,
Yeah,
learned a whole bunch.
thank you for inviting me on here. Like I said, I think before, maybe at the beginning of the episode, that this is the first thing I have been asked to be on rather than asking to be on it.
Well, I hope a lot more people invite you on because, like, you gotta grow, man. You gotta build yourself up there. This is great, and I think you're doing a great job with something small. And I loved hearing that this was made in part with Jasper's Game Day. So,
Yeah,
yeah, thanks for doing
thank you
that.
so much.
No problem at all. Audience, thank you for listening. Hypnos and the Gunslinger Followed. They've already launched, so go pick them up on itch. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful night. I'll see you on the next one. Bye now. Thank you so much to Hypnos for coming onto the show this week. And The Gunslinger Followed is a game that I've played twice now, and I think it has some great story prompts. It's a lot of fun. Go pick it up on Jordan's itch page. It's like $3. It's super cheap, and it's going to give you a lot of hours of entertainment. And thank you for listening, audience. Last week we did break that 800 listener count, so thank you. A ton of people have recently talked to me about coming and joining us on the show. So there's going to be a lot more great projects coming and a couple returning faces who are going to be showing off some new stuff. If you like the show and you want to hear more, please let someone know. Word of mouth is the best way for us to grow, and also go give us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Those stars really help pump up our discoverability, and they get new people on the show, and they get new people talking. Also join the Discord. There are tons of great creators there, and we're still looking for playtesters, artists, and more people to interact with. The next episode will be out February 1st, which is technically our 1-year anniversary. So I'm really excited to be talking to whoever comes onto the show, and I hope to see you there. Take care of yourselves. Have a great night. Bye.